So we've had some interesting conversations right here at Brave New Conversations. Oliver Stone was in last week, and Henry Rollins did a really interesting one, Amy Goodman, which was also interesting. And you know, what we try to do is sort of go in general places that maybe one doesn't go to, certainly not regularly, on those of you who have shows and platforms. So let me start with a question that always interests me about people in their careers. Why and how radio? Was this, did you come out of your mother's womb and say, radio is for me? Or was it a slower evolution? And I noticed you've done so many things in your life. So
yeah.
Was it gradual, and did you know this was it at any one point?
There's kind of two pieces to that. One, most people have as a primary way of experiencing the world, either visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. They say, I see what you're talking about, I hear what you're saying, let's stay in touch, those kinds of things. I'm very auditory. I live in a world of sound. I always have. So radio is, of all the mediums out there, is the one that feels the most natural to me, sounds the most natural to me. Also, when I was, 6 or 7 years old, my parents gave me a crystal radio set, and I remember listening to the radio, with no batteries or anything, and just being amazed by this thing, to the point that when I started at MSU when I was 16, I got a job in campus radio. Well, you get a job. I mean, they don't pay anything, right?
Right.
And,
you volunteer.
Right. That's right. And did that for 3 months. Made a tape, and just after my 17th birthday, got a real job in radio at WITL, AM and FM, Lansing, Michigan, Lansing's #1 country station, and as a DJ. And I did country western music for a year, and then I did progressive rock overnight album cuts for about a year, and I did morning top 40 Drake format drive for about a year, and then I did news for 7 years. And was a program director for about a year, and that was from 68 to 78. And then I got out of that business and went into the world of places where you can actually make some money and do some business and be an entrepreneur for a while. But I'd learned the skills. I was comfortable behind a microphone. I knew how to modulate my voice. I knew how to get in and out of a break. I knew how time worked. And I also understood the business, having been everything from gopher to program director. So in 2002, my wife and I drove from Vermont, where we were living, to Michigan for Thanksgiving to visit our family. I grew up in Michigan, in Lansing. And all the way there, all we could get was right-wing talk radio. And in fact, I heard the Sean Hannity show 3 times, because as we moved through these states, people time delay shows, and the show kept repeating, and he was doing a Habitat for Humanity live remote, and he was calling it the Hannity for Humanity, and he was talking about how no liberal's going to get this house, which is so inconsistent with the whole, and it was just making me crazy. And I'm thinking and talking out loud with Louise, who's been my partner in most of our businesses, and is a very smart businesswoman. I said, I like to listen to talk radio. I mean, I was listening to Sean Hannity. I like to listen to talk radio. And there have to be people like me who would like to listen to the other side, to something other than just conservative talk radio. And there's got to be a business opportunity here. So I wrote an article in 2002 called Talking Back to Talk Radio about how progressive talk radio could actually be profitable and doing good by doing well, or vice versa. And Shelley and Anita Drobny, a couple of venture capitalists in Chicago, read that, and Shelley called me up and said, hey, can you come out and talk with us? And we're thinking of putting this thing together, sort of like what you've been talking about. In fact, in his book, The Road to Air America, Shelley reprints my entire article in the end as an appendix. And that article, got Air America started. But I wasn't part of it at that time, other than being an advisor. We had just sold an advertising agency in '97 and had retired, and we were living in Vermont and thought, that's it, we're going to just write books and goof off. And I just had the itch, you know. So I started calling radio stations around, and I found one in Burlington that had a couple of hours open on a Saturday morning, and the program director was of a mind to try something new, you know, and I wanted to find out if I could still do radio. It had been 30 years, you know. And so we did this show for about 3 months from this little station in Burlington, and about half our calls were, "Is that John Deere 401 still available?" But it worked, and so we made a tape and we shipped it off to IE America Radio, which at that time was actually a progressive talk radio network. Mike Malloy was on there. I was on. They picked up my show, noon to 3. I've been there Eastern Time. I've been there ever since, or been in that time period ever since. The Young Turks were on. We were on Sirius Satellite Radio, and we had about 30 radio stations. So, you know, it started out as a lark, you know, let me see if I can do this. And what's happened over it'll be 8 years in March since we started doing that, is that it's turned into a business, and now we're simulcasting on television with Free Speech TV on Dish Network, 1 hour of our show, and then we cut down all 3 hours to a half-hour show that runs after Al Jazeera News in the evening on Dish Network. We're also now syndicated not just by Dow Global, which is the major syndicator of progressive talk radio in America, the commercial syndicator with Stephanie Miller and Bill Press and Ed Schultz and like that, Mike Malloy. But also we're syndicated by Pacifica. So we're on Pacifica stations all over the country. We're producing simultaneously a for-profit and a not-for-profit stream. We're pumping two signals out to the satellites. And we've also picked up now radio stations in Europe and in Africa. So it's kind of turned into this thing that I think is demonstrating my original hypothesis, which is that if you can do good radio, if you can do a good program that is entertaining, interesting, relevant, thought-provoking, works, you can find an audience.
Well, that's actually very encouraging to hear. And you wrote a piece when Air America went under, I think. Was it a piece, or you were quoted a few times?
I was quoted in the New York Times and LA Times and NPR all interviewed me.
Yeah, and it was a pretty strong statement you were making. You want to talk about that a moment, about the
death of Air America? There were two things I think that killed Air America. One was that because it was undercapitalized in the beginning, which is really the biggest, but I'll get to that in a second. Because it was undercapitalized in the beginning, there was a series almost every year of new investors, and they brought new management teams with them, and each of these new management teams, people tend to want to put their imprint on a company, and so they move the schedule around or bring people in or fire people or whatever on air talent, which is the worst thing you can do in radio. Radio is a very intimate medium. Radio is a phone call. It's a voice in your ear. And so the rule of thumb in radio is it takes anywhere from 6 to 18 months to find your audience, to develop a relationship with people. And over 2, 3, 4 years, that relationship becomes cemented. So the worst thing you can do in radio is blow up your format every year, which is what Air America did, number one. But they did that because, number two, and this is really, I think, the big reason why they failed. Rupert Murdoch lost $100 million a year for 5 consecutive years. You know this, you made the movie about it, on Fox News. Sean Hannity lost $500 million before he made a penny. Nobody was running around going, "Oh, that's Sean Hannity, what a failure," you know? Nobody's, you know, but before he made a penny, they lost $500 million, or nearly. And in the 7 years, I guess it's been, maybe 6 years, that Air America was on the air, I think in total they lost somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 million. So obviously it's not television, it's radio, but still, I would say if there was a major sin that was committed at Air America, it was being undercapitalized.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and it speaks to both the business model and also it was interesting to hear you talk about the distribution of your show.
Yeah.
It's one of the things we spend a lot of time here, Brave New Films, is focusing on distribution. Laura, who heads our distribution department, you know, every day we're looking at what kind of an audience are we reaching? How big is the audience? How can we reach more of an audience?
Right.
And in our universe, the distribution is changing. You know, while we're sitting here, somebody is inventing something that's going to totally change the distribution model. And I think all too often on the progressive side, we only think about the perfect content or the perfect video or the perfect film, not really focusing on how you're going to reach people with it. And I guess part of that is because you have a business background, or you just naturally think that way?
Probably both. I mean, the two are kind of chicken and egg. As I said, we've started a number of businesses and built them up and sold them off. Our theory early in our life was, you know, that we didn't want to wait until we got old to retire. So we've retired 5 times now. And
so now you're retired, working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah, which is pretty close to the actual.
I know.
But you know, was it? No, it wasn't Walt Whitman. I forget which poet it was who said, you know, if you love your work, you never work a day in your life. I really love what I'm doing. I'm having a lot of fun doing it. There are times when I get exhausted, but you know, this is fun.
I share that feeling. Is there a moment? Talking about fun, is there a moment that stands out, or a couple of moments that stand out doing your show, where the love or the feeling of this is exciting, or I'm making a difference, or anything in that universe comes to mind?
Well, you talked about different distribution methods, and I told you about the syndicates that we have, or the distributors. We also have a channel on YouTube, and we've got a channel on Facebook and all this kind of stuff. And we also have a web stream that's free to anybody who wants to listen to it. And we never really paid much attention to it. The day that Obama was elected, the day after, the Wednesday morning, Sean, our producer, Louise and I are sitting in our production meeting about, you know, how are we going to handle today, what are we going to do? And I said, I would like to, and we got 12 phone lines coming in. I said, I'd like to open the phone lines exclusively to people outside the United States. Now, none of these people are listening on our radio stations, because at that time we weren't with Pacifica, we didn't have European and African distribution, so they would have to be listening on the web. And we had no idea. I mean, it is possible to go in and do those metrics, but we had just never bothered to do it. And Sean and Louise are like, are you nuts? You know? And I'm like, let's try it. And they're like, but if it fails, you're going to look like a fool. And I said, I'm willing to look like a fool. I mean, I probably do that fairly regularly anyway. So I opened the mic and I offered my opinion about Obama being elected. I was very happy about it, and I thought this was an era of hope beginning. And I said, and I'd like to hear from people outside the United States. And so I'm asking all of our regular callers into the United States not to call the show. Please don't call the show. We only want to hear from people outside the United States. And the first call was a woman in a little village in southern Mexico, sobbing. You have given us hope. You know, the second call was from somebody in Israel. The third call was from somebody in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where they're having a civil war. The fourth call was from Nigeria. We got 2 calls from Kenya. We got dozens of calls from European nations all over Europe. I mean, our lines were, all 12 lines filled up just like that, and were slammed through the whole hour. We couldn't even get to all of them. And, you know, universally they were saying the same thing. You know, this is a world-changing event. This is, you know, and we are so hopeful and we're so excited. And it was one of the most astounding hours of radio for me that I've ever done.
And is it an issue for you where you draw the line in terms of journalism and activism? I know we've now got some wonderful progressive voices with you and Amy and Huffington Post, and sometimes it's been interesting for us where it's very clear we're doing reporting, we're doing investigating, and we're trying to move people to take action.
Right.
With some of the folks that we work with, it sometimes becomes a question. Do you ask yourself that, or is it one, or not?
You know, it was for me back in the 70s when I was doing news, but I don't pretend to be doing news or to be objective. As a talk show host, my job is to have a take and offer an opinion. So I'll review the news and then offer my opinion on it. So in fact, if anything, it's the opposite. My job is to make sure that I get the opinion in there because I think that people are listening primarily for three reasons. Number one, they want to know what's going on. They want the news. But number two, they want it in a context. They want a frame for it. They want an understanding of perspective, and some validation of their own worldview. You know, I'm not the only person who thinks this way. I'm not nuts, isn't that, you know? And number three, they're looking for ammunition to win the water cooler war. They want to be able to talk to the guy in the cubicle next to them and win once in a while in the arguments, you know, and he's listening to Limbaugh and writing down his talking points, or, you know, how to deal with their crazy brother-in-law over Thanksgiving dinner and not end up with a fist fight in the house, you know. And so that's what I'm trying to do on my program, and I think we do. I think we do fairly effectively. And so it's, you know, some of my peers, you know, you said you had Amy Goodman on, for example. I think Amy Goodman is one of the best working journalists in America, one of the best working journalists in the world. Amy doesn't come on and say, here's my opinion. She comes on and says, here's the news, and you can draw your own conclusions. I come on and say, here's my opinion. It's a different thing.
And are you comfortable saying, here's my opinion, and here's what you should do about it? Or
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I regularly, you know, well, actually, I would never be so presumptuous as to say to my listeners, this is what you should do about it. Instead, what I will say, and I do say regularly, is this is what I'm doing about it. This is what you might consider doing about it. Here are some things that people are doing about it. Here are things that you could do about it. Do you have ideas about better ways that we can do about it? But you know, I give my listeners a lot of credit for intelligence, and it's always validated. One of the things that we've learned, and it's fascinating because I do this show out of a Clear Channel station in Portland that runs Rush Limbaugh on their big station and us on their, we're also a pretty good sized signal, 25,000 watt signal. And we're able to look at the demographics of these different audiences really closely. And our demographic is much closer to that of NPR, which is highly educated, more affluent, and tending toward more activism than conservative talk radio. So it's a lot of fun talking to smart people all day long. I enjoy it.
And do you think that around the activism, because certainly with the Tea Party stuff, which I think comes from genuine angst, and I think partly progressives have had an enormous failure in not speaking to that angst, that economic angst particularly. But it seems, at least for the moment, there's more energy around conservative activism than progressive activism. Have you seen that, and do you have any analysis of thoughts about that?
Yeah, you know, as we were leading up to the Iraq War, we had more people in the streets than ever before in the history of the world on any issue, as you know. So progressive activism isn't dead and isn't invisible, but at the moment it's not as prominent as the Tea Party movement. The Tea Party movement, as most people have figured out by now, was started by, you know, some billionaires and some big bucks corporations and some right-wing foundations, and, you know, kind of through the back door, Freedom Works and Dick Armey and all these things. But there are a lot of people in the Tea Party movement who are just scared Americans. Their jobs have gone overseas. Their kids can't get a college loan. They're looking at, you know, the world seems to be melting down. They don't know what to do. They don't know who to blame. Many of them watch Fox News, so they're tragically low information voters, if not misinformation. And 5-6 months ago, when this really started becoming a phenomena, I started suggesting on my program to my listeners, we should get out and show up at the tea parties. I think this is a good idea, to show up at a tea party with a sign or with a slogan or with literature in those areas where we have agreement. In other words, don't show up with something about, isn't it great we've got a black president? Because there are a bunch of racists, not a lot of them, but there are some racists in that movement. I think they're the fringe, but don't show up with something, you know, in favor of abortion or abortion rights. But wouldn't it be great to show up with a sign that says, why does Stephen Hemsley, the CEO of United Healthcare, make $700 million for 5 years' work, and I can't get health insurance? You know, that's and for example, and that's the area where what we're seeing, I think, right now in the Tea Party movement. Of course, it's stratifying. The GOP and the wealthy and the people who want to control it and make a buck off it are spinning off. We're seeing that in Nashville right now. But there's also the populist part of it. And I think the populist part of it, with just a little bit of information, would realize that they have far more in common with progressives than they have with the GOP. But I really think that if Dick Armey and the Koch family and you know, all the billionaires that are supporting this thing are going to create a national movement, what the hell? Let's take it over. I mean, I say the same thing about the Democratic Party. Here's this multi-million-dollar organization. If you and I, Robert, wanted to take over NBC, we'd have to raise billions of dollars. If we want to take over the Democratic Party, not you and me, but all of us want to take over the Democratic Party, they're standing there with the doors wide open saying, please walk in. So let's do it. You know, the conservatives did it with the Republicans in the 70s. It's our turn.
And there is certainly the way things are going, those doors are going to be even more open, asking for people to come in and take over.
Maybe. We'll see. You know, it may be that corporate money becomes, there's such a deluge of corporate money coming as a result of the Citizens United Supreme Court decision that, well, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, speaking of corporate money, your book, which was, how many years ago?
It was published in 2002.
2002 is so on the money, The Rise of Corporate Dominance and the Theft of Human Rights. Really a book that affected my thinking very deeply, and my hat's off to you. From the perspective of knowing a lot about this issue, do you see any potential solutions to the Citizens United Supreme Court ruling? Anything that activists can do, or any pressure that we can put on legislatively? Jerry Nadler was here last week and is part of a committee that Pelosi has appointed to try to look at it, so there's some movement there. But what would be your suggestion of what we do so we don't just slit our wrists over it?
The short answer is we need to amend the Constitution to, in the 14th Amendment, insert the word natural before the word person, so that corporations can no longer claim personhood and can no longer claim that the Constitution protects their rights. They don't have rights, they have privileges, which is a whole different thing. If the strategy is let's pass a constitutional amendment that simply deals with First Amendment or campaign financing, it's nibbling around the edges and it leaves intact corporate power. We have to say corporations are not persons.
And I think it's the perfect time to start talking about it, because going back to your Tea Party discussion, and I think we've all had this experience, the hatred of corporations is left, right, and center. The fact that progressives have not found a way to capitalize this, I think if we don't, will be one of the tragedies of this time that we're in right now. And my last question, is they're signaling me about time, speaking of tragedies, Afghanistan. So you're one of the few voices early on, as you know, as we did our Afghanistan work, who were receptive to hearing what we had to say. When we started the Rethink Afghanistan campaign, we lost people on our own email list, said, go to hell and don't ever send me another email, and we lost funders in the whole thing. So tell us a little bit about your perspective on Afghanistan and what got you there early, and what you think we ought to be doing these days.
Well, what got me there early was being gassed in Grand River Avenue in East Lansing, Michigan in 1967, in an anti-war protester. It must have been 68, but whatever year it was. I didn't serve in the military. I didn't go to Vietnam, but I remember Vietnam. I remember the time. I know what it did to the Johnson presidency. I think LBJ would be remembered right now as one of our very best presidents, were it not for Vietnam. He cut poverty in half in 4 years. I mean, he did some amazing things in this country, created Medicare, just some extraordinary things. And he started the Vietnam War. He really cranked it up. And so when Obama said that Vietnam's the good war, we're going to go for the Vietnam War, it just so looked to me like LBJ in Vietnam all over again. And I thought, this is going to be a disaster for his presidency. It's going to be a disaster for the American people. It's going to be a disaster for the Afghan people. It's going to make a lot of money for Halliburton. None of those are positive outcomes in my mind. So from day one, even when he was campaigning and saying Afghanistan is the good war, I was saying, there's a few areas where I don't agree with this guy.
And have you, I mean, we've seen a big change in the last few months in terms of the support for the Rethink Afghanistan campaign. When you had graciously had us on and talked about Afghanistan, I assume at that point you were not making a political calculation, that is, my audience wants this, but you were making a calculation, this is the right thing to talk about, and therefore we're going to talk about it?
I had the same experience you did. When during the campaign, when I spoke against both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama embracing the war in Afghanistan, and I got some blowback. It was not a big deal because people were focused on other things. But early on, the first 6 months or so of the Obama presidency, when I would criticize him for maintaining Afghanistan, and Iraq for that matter, I got the same kind of blowback. I got the angry emails. I got the, hey, he's only been in there 6 months. And my response was, 2 weeks after Franklin Roosevelt took office, he had the Civilian Conservation Corps up and he had thousands of people employed like that. I mean, don't give me this 6 month stuff, A. And B, he said he's going to increase the war. Well, here, a year later, he actually increased the war. So what I've seen over the course of the year is my emails, our blog posts on our website, and my callers have gone from, and I don't think this is the result of their listening to me. I think this is just the zeitgeist, the sense of the time, the spirit of the times, is that people have gone from, we've got to support this guy no matter what, he can be a transformational president, to, oh my God, what's he doing? And I think there's a real serious sense of that latter.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think we've seen the same thing. And the last question on this is, as lonely as it was in the beginning when we were speaking about Afghanistan, I don't know if I've watched The Sound of Music too many times, with its cheerful ending, but I really think there's an opportunity here because and bring me down to earth if you disagree here, which is, it's already an unpopular war. We have an economic crisis in this country and we have elections coming up. Well, who wants to run in 2010 on spending $56,000 every minute just for the surge? So it seems to me there may be a chance to talk, and to the Tea Party folks, about military-industrial complex stuff that we've never been able to talk about before. Do you agree with that? And do you think and what kind of talking can and should we all be doing?
Well, I think that this is one of those areas where we should be trying to find common ground with people on the other side politically. At the same time, I'm encouraged somewhat by the fact that, at least to the best of my recollection, Lyndon Johnson never said, let's sit down and talk to the Viet Cong. And right now, the Obama administration, through back channels, as you know, is talking to the Taliban. Yeah. And, because they get it. This isn't an ideological puppet state of Russia or China or something like that. These are people who are just upset that their home has been invaded to a large extent. I mean, there's other agendas as well, obviously. I'm oversimplifying, but so I think that there's an opportunity here also for the Obama administration to get it right, to clean up George Bush's mess. And we also have to keep remembering, this is George Bush's mess. And I'm hopeful that they take that opportunity, and I'm hopeful that they play it out right. Greg Mortensen has a great lesson to teach these people, his 3 cups of tea, about, you make friends when you build schools, you make enemies when you bomb people. It's real simple. This is not rocket science.
Well, on a hopeful note, we will end on that. It's always good to end on a hopeful one. Thank you for everything you're doing and all your support.
It's an honor to be here.
Thank you.